All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining for the final part of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion webinar series. This 8-part webinar series featured 2 tracks. Sessions on the Tuesday track throughout the series were aimed at building diversity, equity, and inclusion practices in our workplace and in the community. And sessions that were on the Thursday track were featured on highlighting diverse-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. This webinar series is presented by the Greater Wyoming Valley Chamber's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council and sponsored by PNC Bank. Before I introduce our presenting sponsor, I want to go over some housekeeping items. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. To be respectful of everyone's time, we have allotted time at the end for questions and answers. Feel free to ask a question at any time during the presentation by submitting them in the Q&A section or in the chat box. This event is also being live streamed on Facebook. For anyone watching on Facebook, please enter your questions in the comments section and we'll ask them for you on your behalf. A recording of this session will be available on our Facebook and YouTube pages by the end of the week and will be linked on the main event page for the webinar series. Now, to get us started, I want to thank our sponsor, PNC Bank, for again sponsoring our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion webinar series. We have a quick video from PNC to show, and then we'll hear some remarks from Jamie Ryan before he introduces today's speakers.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of PNC Bank, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. At PNC, we embrace and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion as a core element of our values and culture. We recognize that it's bigger than any single person or group, and when coupled with collaborative teams and inclusive leaders, has far-reaching impact. Taking the time to join us today indicates that you're interested in learning more about the roles and responsibilities necessary to create more opportunities for positive understanding and change. Thank you for showing up to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion today. Thank you also to the Greater Wyoming Valley Chamber for creating this series, and to the phenomenal presenters for sharing their time and expertise to help foster a more inclusive culture within our community. So it's my pleasure to introduce Stephanie Longo. Miss Longo is known as an expert on Italian-American history of Northeastern Pennsylvania and has authored several works on the subject. Her most recent book, Italians of Lackawanna County, has been recognized with a Gold Award in the history category in the 2019 Nonfiction Book Awards and with a Gold Award from the Literary Titan Book Awards. Miss Longo is a dual citizen of the United States and Italy and has spoken both regionally and nationally on the subject of Italian immigration to the United States. She's a graduate of both the University of Scranton and Regent University. She has made it her mission to continue to preserve the history that her ancestors brought to the United States. Ms. Longo is presently the Associate Producer and Chief Administration Officer of the Italian American Podcast and an award-winning journalist. So without further ado, I'll turn the presentation over to Stephanie at this point. Thank you.
Jamie, grazie mille for such a nice introduction, and just a great thank you to the Greater Wyoming Valley Chamber of Commerce for having me today. Talking about Italian-American heritage, culture, and anything in between is something that I absolutely love doing, and to get to share what has been going on in our community and to be able to use that to help others during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic has been something very important to me. So I'm very proud and honored to be here today. So the topic is preserving and promoting ethnic-owned businesses, a case study. So what I'm going to be talking to all of you about is just how we've been able to accomplish this within the overall Italian-American community, explain what we've been doing as a community, and give you some ideas on how to use that on your own in your own local communities as well as your own ethnic communities. I'll be giving a little bit of a description of ethnicity and just trying to help you understand a little bit about what's going on in Italian America, as well as how some of that could be translated into the overall discussion of America. So let's get started. The first question that people ask me when I tell them that I work in the Italian American community is, well, who are Italian Americans? And we're a very diverse ethnic community in the United States. There are more than 15.7 million people in the United States who identify themselves as Italian Americans, and we constitute nearly 6% of the United States population. We're the nation's fourth largest European ethnic ancestry group after the Germans, the Irish, and the English. So we're a very vibrant community. And what you can also see in our community is that we're a young community. We have a lot of Italian Americans that are of a younger generation, perhaps even the fourth or fifth generation in from immigration, that are still preserving and promoting their ethnic heritage. For myself, it was my grandfather that was the most recent immigrant to the United States. So we are a very vibrant community that just tries to celebrate it as much as possible. What I would like to show you here is just a map of the states with the highest percentage of Italian Americans, because this is where people actually get a little bit surprised. So if you see the darkest green, which would be New Jersey, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, they have the highest concentration of Italian Americans. Then the slightly darker green would be your New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and then the colors fade out a little bit as we go. The reason why people came to primarily this northeastern East Coast area is because of its proximity to the port of Ellis Island, which was the major port of entry for the immigrants when they came from Italy. Philadelphia was another port as well, and Boston was. So you're seeing just that closeness to the Atlantic Ocean. They didn't really have the money when they came to come further into the United States unless somebody was sponsoring them to get across the nation. So that's why you see that heavy concentration. And right here in wonderful northeastern Pennsylvania, we have one of the nation's largest concentrations of Italian Americans. And it's going to, I think, surprise you a little bit when I get to the next slide. So the United States Census comes out with a survey that's part of the overall census that we take every 10 years. The most recent one that we have is the 2014 American Community Survey, and people self-identify as Italian American as a part of the census if they are so inclined to do so. It's voluntary to mention your ethnicity. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we don't have the recent numbers from the 2020 census. From what I understand, the more recent numbers are going to be out in early 2022. So the 2014 is the most recent that we have. But check it out. We have Dunmore as the number 12 most Italian town in the United States as part of this survey. So you're thinking the top 20, Dunmore is number 12. But then it gets even more exciting, because Jenkins Township, Luzerne County, is number 15. West Pittston is number 16. Old Forge is number 17. And Houston is number 19. So split between Lackawanna and Luzerne counties, you have 5 of the top 20 most Italian towns in the United States. To me, this is an interesting peculiarity, because I study the actual ethnic makeup of each of these towns. And when I say the ethnic makeup, I actually mean the exact towns from Italy that came to settle in these locations. And Lackawanna and Luzerne County are, oddly enough, an anomaly in the Italian American culture. So most of the Italians that came to the United States came from southern Italy. My family came from Campania and Calabria. So anything south of Rome is considered southern Italy. Anything north of Rome is north or central Italy. But in our area, while a lot of these towns that you see, for example, Dunmore has a strong population of people from my family's town, which is called Guardia Lombardi. Old Forge has a strong population of people from Felito. Both of those towns are in Campania, the region of Campania. But when you talk about West Pittston, Hughstown, Jenkins Township, they have a strong population of people from a town called Gualdo Tadino. And that's actually located in the region of Umbria. So that's north of Rome. You don't see a lot of that in Italian American immigration to the United States. You tend to see more people coming in from southern Italy, because after the unification of Italy in the 1860s, Originally, southern Italy was part of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. And when unification came as part of what was called the Risorgimento, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies ceased to exist, and northern Italy absorbed the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. And because of that, it became more and more impoverished. The north was putting all the money into northern Italian towns. The southern Italian towns had to really struggle. Plus, there were also some plagues and things. My family owned a chestnut grove in Italy, and they ended up coming over because there was actually a pest that killed the chestnuts. So they had no way of earning money. So you tend to see more southern Italians coming over to escape that poverty that came after the Risorgimento, but you see more northern central Italians, like the people from Umbria, that came over as well, because they were able to find work in the mines and the rail industry. And just to give you an idea of how that concentration hit, you can see the coal fields of northeastern Pennsylvania, and that strip that you see that's cutting across Lackawanna County, going from Carbondale down to Nanticoke. A lot of the Italian towns, like there's the Italian ethnic towns, like I showed you before, they are situated on that coal vein because the miners had to be able to walk someplace. Hazleton also has a strong concentration of Italian Americans, and also down in the Pottsville, Shamokin, Mount Carmel, Mahanoy City area, there are Italian pockets down there as well. They all had to be able to walk to the mines. These immigrants came to this area specifically to work in the coal mines, but they also came for the railways and stonemasonry. And you could just see some of these photos here. These are of Italian coal miners as well as Italians working in the rail industry. They were the big industries that came here, and they were able to make a better life for themselves by doing this, and they settled, and their families remained in the area. So now I want to get into a little bit of a discussion of what is ethnicity, because I think that's where a lot of people are like, hey, wait a minute, why are you so focused on being Italian American? Aren't you American? I'm going to try to answer that question for you right now. So there's a difference between race, ethnicity, and nationality. Race is something that is inherent in our biology, and it is therefore inherited across generations, while ethnicity is something that we acquire or self-ascribe, and it's based on factors like where we live or the culture that we share with others. Nationality is the legal sense of belonging to a specific political nation state. So think of it as race is something that you don't choose. This is something that you're born with, while ethnicity is something that you choose, and you choose to make that your own. And nationality is based off of geographic location. In the case of Italians, we actually fit all three of these. So in the heyday of immigration to the United States, Italian was actually considered a race. I see a lot of old documents from the era of immigration that actually have race Italian on there. This was also something that was used during the immigration quotas that happened in the 1920s, where they were trying to get people from southern Italy not to come to the United States. They actually put a quota on and said you can't enter after a certain time, because they wanted to make sure that the races weren't overtaken, so to speak, in a situation like that. It's a very interesting thing. If you get a chance to look up the immigration quotas of the 1920s, it's a very interesting discussion. Ethnicity, like I said, is something that we acquire. Italian Americans choose their ethnicity. We choose to be a part of this culture, and we get that through our families. It's passed down generation to generation. Some of my earliest memories are of my mother teaching me about my family coming from Italy, teaching me about this is how Italians celebrate Christmas Eve. This is how Italians do simple things such as we all joke around. I'm even wearing it today, our cornicello, the Italian horn. You don't find too many Italian Americans who leave their homes without an Italian horn, because we think that it is protecting us from bad luck. It's just one of those things that we do as a culture. And then, of course, there's the Italian nationality. That's of the Kingdom of Italy or the Republic of Italy, depending on when somebody came over. I myself, I'm a dual citizen of the United States and Italy. So I'm Italian ethnic and I'm Italian national. It's a conversation that is still going on, but ethnicity, again, is just something that we acquire and self-ascribe. It's something that's taught, learned, or just picked up along the way. A really good book that I think everybody should read that goes into this discussion of ethnicity as something that we learn for ourselves is called Ethnic Options. And it's by the sociologist Mary C. Waters. And this term is an expression of her conception that ethnic identity of the descendants of immigrants is flexible, symbolic, and voluntary, and it's not a definitive aspect of their identity. I personally disagree with that slightly. I think that my identity is intrinsically tied to my Italian Americanness, and you can't separate that. But I also know a lot of Italian Americans who are like, yeah, my family came from Italy, but that's just a part of who I am. That's not 100% of it. So where she's saying that ethnic identity is flexible is a good indicator of how a lot of people in our ethnic community and others tend to feel. Again, like I said before, the American Community Survey in 2014, people are self-ascribing that Italian identity. So that's why we're seeing this population of Italian Americans. It's not something that you check off on a race or ethnicity form when you're being asked. It's something that you self-ascribe as the Italian American ethnicity. Mary Waters argues that with the achievement of middle-class suburban status, ethnicity becomes a lifestyle option and a costless form of community. And that's really true. In our ethnic community as a whole, we have a lot of people who just participate because it's something that's familiar. It's something that brings back their time growing up. And it's just something that brings back a cherished memory for them. And you could see a lot of that in the Italian American community, that it's an overall form of community because we're able to share some of our shared experiences as Italian Americans and learn from each other. So it is a type of a community. And like I said, we're finding that more and more people are self-identifying as Italian, as shown in the 2014 American Community Survey findings. We're also finding that through some surveying that we have done on our own at the Italian American podcast. A lot of people self-identify as Italian American, and we're very proud of that because that tells us that our ethnic culture is alive and well in the United States. So when you're talking about Italian American ethnicity and the word local, we tend to redefine that a little bit because to us, our ethnic community is not constricted by geographic bounds. And let me just show you this. This is the old neighborhood. This is Little Italy, New York City, 1974. This is kind of the old version of that quintessential Italian neighborhood. You see the Italian cheeses, you see that superette grocery, you see the dairy store, you see all these people, you see that person carrying it looks like onions in the photo. This is a typical Italian scene from the 1970s, from that old Italian neighborhood. Those are slowly dying out because there's a lot of people leaving those neighborhoods to perhaps live in a suburb, or there's other ethnic groups coming in. These neighborhoods are changing, but there's still a place where they exist, and that is in today's neighborhood, which is a digital piazza. One thing that we have on the Italian American podcast is a wonderful member-based group that's called The New Neighborhood, and it's a digital group that we have. And I absolutely love it because the way that we define local is not just by a geographic bound. Obviously, if we want Italian products, we're going to go to the places that's close to us. Like here, I mean, at least by me in Dunmore, I've got Doma's, I've got Catalano's, and if I want to go to Sabatel's in Pittston, I'm going. These places are awesome. I love them. However, if I can't find something, I'm able to find that online now, and that's vital for the survival of the Italian American culture. Because remember that map that I showed you at the beginning, the states with the highest percentage of Italian Americans. Check out the Dakotas, North and South Dakota. They have one of the lowest populations. So do Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama. There's not too many of us down there, but there are people there. What are they going to do to be able to feel still connected to their Italian community? They join the digital piazzas. They're able to find things out online. They're able to read Italian American newspapers. They're able to listen to the Italian American podcast. They're able to participate in groups such as the New Neighborhood. And that digital piazza is redefining local. So when I talk about local, please don't think that I'm forgetting Northeastern Pennsylvania, but in terms of the Italian ethnicity, we ended up redefining it because there's local geographically and there's digitally local. So some of the businesses that I'm going to tell you about in this presentation are digitally local for us. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has had a very strong impact on our business and cultural community as Italian Americans. We have lost some very important members of the Italian American community due to the pandemic, and we've also lost some businesses. We've seen businesses that have been over 100 years old being forced to close due to the COVID-19 pandemic, especially due to the restaurant restrictions that were in place in New York City. Little Italy did lose a lot of restaurants, and we've just seen a lot of issues happening. And this is where I think a lot of non-Italian American businesses can learn some lessons, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about those. We've also seen a big hit to our overall culture because traditional feasts did not take place in 2020. And you see some of Northeastern Pennsylvania's amazing feasts. You see St. Ubaldo, you see the La Festa Italiana, the Pittston Tomato Festival, the Old Forge Filetes Festival. None of those took place last year because of the pandemic. These feasts are considered the high point of the year in the Italian American culture, and none of them took place. And for us, that's almost an identity crisis, because we didn't have that place where we were able to go and share our culture with other people who share it as well. And it was difficult. COVID-19 did that. So we saw a big separation in our community from what we normally get to experience and what we got to experience in 2020. And that's what made these digital piazzas and these digital ways of people getting to communicate with each other online so important. When I say the word piazza, that actually is the Italian word for square. In Italy, the town square is the place where all the action takes place. So if you want to find out the gossip, if you want to go to the mercato, if you want to know what's happening, you go to the piazza. So the digital piazza is the place to be. At the Italian American Podcast, when we saw all this going on, we created our own hashtag that's called Support Italian American. And for Small Business Saturday, we decided to focus on the Italian American businesses. And we did a social media campaign. You could see some of the places that we highlighted. We had Grandma's Noodles. It's an online pasta company that asked us if we could help them out. We have Marcella Di Cuore, a young lady who handcrafts Italian jewelry, and Only the Finest Italian Cookies. They're out of Providence, Rhode Island, so one of those heavily concentrated Italian areas. Italian cookies for sale for events, but there weren't events happening, so she had to pivot her business. We're using that hashtag also to support Italian American cultural activities, Italian American authors. Anything that's Italian American, we want to support it through the Italian American Podcast. So this was our first way of dipping into that, because we saw the impact that COVID-19 had on our ethnic business community. And yes, we also celebrated Italian American businesses right here in Northeastern Pennsylvania. We're trying to celebrate everybody as much as we can. And I want to tell you just a few of the business stories of what happened during the pandemic, because I think that this might give people an idea of what they could possibly do either for their businesses or for their local ethnic communities. The first one I'm going to tell you about is the one that broke my heart the most. I Am Books in Boston, Massachusetts. This photo is taken on their last day in business. The COVID-19 pandemic forced the business to close. I have had the wonderful opportunity of presenting for I Am Books 3 times, and it is truly an Italian American cultural hub, like their sign says. You could only sell your books in there if you're Italian American or if your book is of an Italian American topic. And the store had to close because they were losing customers due to the pandemic. The rent was unable to be paid. They tried a crowdfunding, and the crowdfunding just didn't work. They ended up transitioning the bookstore completely online. So you're still able to purchase books from I Am Books, and hopefully they'll be able to get another brick and mortar store because it is such an amazing cultural hub. But this is just one of the instances of what the COVID-19 pandemic caused in the Italian American community. Another is La Bottega della Nonna. They are based out of New York City as well as online. And this is Rosella Rago. She's one of the co-hosts of the Italian American Podcast, and her grandmother. The basic premise of Rosella's work is cooking with nonna, so cooking with grandmothers. And she meets these Italian American grandmothers and preserves their old recipes from the old country. She also has a wonderful online supermarket where if you can't find something in your Italian specialty store locally, that is the best place to go because she probably has it or she can get it for you. With the pandemic, Rosella realized that her business actually started booming because she was more of an online business, even though she's based in New York City. She was actually able to get an entire warehouse in Brooklyn because she was getting such an influx of stock and everything going on because people were shopping with her because the mom and pop specialty stores unfortunately were closed due to restrictions by the various state governments. She saw an area where she was able to then support the Italian and Italian American business community because she only sells Italian and Italian American products, and to be able to really grow her business that way. Italy itself had a lot of lockdown restrictions, unfortunately. This was a way to help businesses over in Italy also survive the pandemic. So Rosella has been able to pivot her business. Ernie Rossi and Company. This is one of the sadder stories of the pandemic, but it's going to have a happy ending. So Ernie Rossi and Company is Little Italy's oldest gift shop. It was established in 1910, but of course, pandemic restrictions, people couldn't go to visit E. Rossi and Company. He ended up having crowdfunding to try to keep the business open, and he's looking for buyers to be able to participate in that. And the business is hopefully going to survive, and I believe strongly that it will, because Italian Americans really do try to protect their own, and E. Rossi and Company is one great way. Crowdfunding was a wonderful way to just be able to help keep that business afloat and to be able to help keep the doors open and keep going with this, because you needed something to be able to preserve what he's doing. And a business that's been established in 1910, the last thing that you want to see is for something like that to close due to something like the pandemic. It's tragic when something like that happens. We've seen it in our community. And a local one is Arcaro and Janelle out of Old Forge. And we all know Governor Wolf's restrictions made it very difficult for the restaurant industry. Arcaro and Janelle was able to pivot their business to make it exclusively takeout for the time being, and they were able to stay open and keep their staff and to keep moving forward. And that was one of the lessons that I've seen just with these businesses that we've been in communication with through the podcast. Everybody was doing what they could to keep moving forward and to keep their businesses preserved. Because remember, when you're thinking of an Italian American business, you're not just thinking of a business as this structure where people go. It's a community center for us because we're able to live our culture in these different ways. I'm able to live my Italian American culture by going to eat at Arcaro and Janelle's, buying something at one of the Italian specialty shops, grabbing a book from IM Books, and just thoroughly enjoying that. So these are cultural hubs for us in different ways. So now the question is, where do we actually go from here in the Italian American community? I want you to think of ethnicity as an educational experience, because for us and our community, it doesn't matter where you're from in Italy. Once your family settled in the United States, you have become an Italian American. And yes, we're very proud. I'm so proud to tell people that my family is from Campania and Calabria. I could get on subtopics about that anytime. But we also learn from each other as an Italian American community. Through our new neighborhood group, I have learned so many Italian recipes that I never would have dreamed of trying because they're not from my section of Italy. And it's helping to create a more educational, more diverse Italian American experience. But outside of that as well, we're getting the opportunity to discover other ethnicities, because other ethnicities are also interested in us. And to me, that is really key, because a lot of times you tend to think of white ethnic groups set off on their own, and people don't tend to realize who we are because we're lumped into white ethnic groups. But each group does have a story to tell. And I'll never forget when a Polish friend of mine was telling me about pierogi, and I love pierogi. I'm half Lithuanian, so I understand some of this stuff. But she was telling me about pierogies, and she finally said to me, she's like, they're like ravioli, but they're filled with potato. And it was just one of those funny things where it was like, yeah, like they're different, but they're the same in some ways. And I think that's really special. I was telling another friend of mine from Italy about a Lithuanian dish called kugel. It's like a potato cake. And she said to me, oh, that's purè di patata, which is a Neapolitan dish, just done differently. So when you open up that conversation about different ethnicities, you're able to learn a lot about each other. And we're seeing that in the Italian American community. We're adopting things that belong to other ethnic groups, and we're welcoming other ethnic groups into our own. With us in the Italian American podcast, we're also working on a fabulous Italian American app that I'm super excited about. We're trying to do what we can always to preserve and promote the Italian American community, whether that is the businesses, whether that's the artisans, the writers, the museums, whatever is out there that's part of the Italian American community, we want to make sure that we are promoting it in some way, shape, or form. So we have an app that we are in the process of developing. The rationale behind that is that whatever we're able to do to keep little pockets of the Italian American experience alive, we're helping everybody keep alive their ability to represent our ethnic community as a whole. So you're seeing this app coming to life. And that all kind of came through that Support Italian American hashtag, where we realized a lot of people need our support right now. How can we support our community as a whole? So definitely keep your eyes open for that, because I'm excited. We're also creating databases of Italian American businesses. And let me tell you, this is hard because you're dealing with 50 states and you're dealing with a lot of towns and a lot of states. And we are trying to get every single business as a part of our app, as a part of our databases, whatever we can do, because we want to know what's out there. If we, who are considered leaders in the Italian American community, don't do something to help these businesses and to help our community, we're going to lose it. And we don't want our culture getting lost. So we're trying to do what we can to create this database. Lots of information, lots of time being put into it. I'm working with an intern right now trying to keep a database just of the Italian American feasts in the United States. And it has taken us, I can't tell you how long. And we are at about 300 and some feasts. That's just Italian feasts going on in the United States. So imagine that last year when I said to you about the feasts that were canceled. That's 300 and some that were canceled. And that's the biggest money maker for that particular community for the year. So imagine the economic impact that had on the community. So we're trying to do what we can so we can get the word out and get people to support. We've noticed a lot of people who are saying, hey, if I'm within a driving distance, I'll go to this feast. So we want to make sure that people know that these exist. And we're also trying to strengthen community connections. And I purposely chose this photo. This is the Italian flag, but done in food, because what is the first thing that people think of when they think of Italian Americans? They think food. I mean, it's our culture. If you have had a piece of pizza in your life, you have experienced Italian American culture. So food for us is how we share it. Everything in our lives as Italian Americans revolves around food. And that could be a good thing as well as a really bad thing for the waistline, because we do have some really good food. It's because food for us represents connection. We connect over Sunday dinner with our families. We connect over the traditional recipes that we have at the holiday season, and we connect by sharing recipes and sharing stories. But what we want to also do is experience other ethnicities. And one way that you can experience other ethnicities for yourself is just by trying their food, because food is a representation of culture. I am not afraid to go and try the most random food from some culture that I've never tried before, as long as there's not something, I'm allergic to onions. So as long as there's no onions in there, we're good. It's one of those things where we just want to try and experiment. And it's interesting, just talking to people, you start learning things about their cultures and how they do it. I remember I was at a Mexican restaurant and got into conversation with the chef, and we were tossing back and forth with, this is how we do it in our culture. versus this is how we do in the Italian culture. And it was a really interesting discussion. And I got some really cool cooking tips. You don't get these connections without conversing. So you can't be afraid to strengthen those connections. And for us, if you want to learn our culture, come to one of our wonderful Italian restaurants. I am almost positive that everybody on this call has at least at one point tried something Italian. And if you haven't, I will be more than happy to suggest some places for you. And how can you help? I think that we as Americans need to start becoming more community caretakers than anything else. You are the caretaker of your community. And being a community caretaker takes on a lot of roles. It means getting outside of your own ethnic box. For myself as an Italian American, of course, I'm going to do whatever I can to support my own community. But I also can't be afraid to try to build that bridge to another community that is out there. I would love to try any ethnic or cultural food. I just got done saying that because food is such an important part of my culture. I know that it's an important part of other cultures and I want to try that. Being a community caretaker could be something as simple as welcoming the new family to your neighborhood and learning a little bit about them, just trying to be friendly. Or it could also be going to that ethnic grocery store that is in your neighborhood and seeing what they have, trying something there. We have a wonderful Indian grocery store in my neighborhood, and I go there every so often and I'm constantly asking, like, what is this? And would this be good? And is this too spicy? Or what do you try here? It gives them the chance to talk about their culture, and they're just as proud of it as we are of ours. So by allowing people to share their experiences, you're able to help take care of the community overall. And it's really simple. All that you have to do is perhaps share something to your social media. Hey, I checked out this awesome Indian grocery store in Scranton, and people will know about it. And just because you're not part of that culture doesn't mean that you can't at least see what it's all about, because then you're learning about these people and helping them get that sense of pride of their culture. Because I could just speak for myself. You ask me a question about Italian things, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to be so happy that you asked. And I think that's the same with everybody else, at least the people that I've come into contact with. You really need to help your local ethnic community. And I think that's vital, especially right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, because like I said, businesses are closing, businesses are in trouble, and they need that extra help. And especially think of the new wave of immigration that we are experiencing here in Northeastern Pennsylvania. A lot of times these people don't know a lot of people in the area. They may have just came over and they may have just started a business and the pandemic hit. Don't be afraid to go to that business. Introduce yourself. Say, hey, I live nearby and I just wanted to check your business out and see what you have. Try something. And then you're experiencing a culture that you wouldn't have gotten to experience otherwise. And you're making a friend in the process, because they'll remember that you came during a difficult time. It's always interesting to just see people when they're asked about their personal culture and how excited they get about it. And you can't think that your own culture is the best. I work in Italian American affairs, but I also know, like, it's the best culture for me personally. And thank God I was born into it because I love it so much. But I also know somebody who's of a different culture is just going to be like, okay, that's really cool, but I love my culture too. I want to know what makes you love your culture, and I want to discover that. And I think that's a way that we can all help each other out, by just discovering and not being afraid to build bridges instead of walls around ourselves and keep ourselves insulated in our own culture. Discover what that other ethnic culture is that's out there. And a final thought. I absolutely love this quote by former President Jimmy Carter. We have become not a melting pot, but a beautiful mosaic. Different people, different beliefs, different yearnings, different hopes, different dreams. I think that this quote encapsulates the American ethnic experience, because it is a mosaic. We as Italian Americans are just one little part of that mosaic. And We try to be the artistic food happy part of it because that's just who we are as a people. But we also know that there's other pieces of that mosaic that are just as beautiful and just as exciting to try. And whatever we can do to help preserve and promote these businesses, whether it's just a simple social media post, whether it's just going in there personally and saying hello, or whether it's doing what we do at the Italian American Podcast and really taking it on a really strong ethnic level, we're going to see people come together. And isn't that what it's all about? You want to come together over shared experiences and shared culture. And the business community is a cultural hub for us all. So with that, I'm just going to put up my contact information. I love talking to people, so don't be afraid to connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, friend request me. I just like talking to people about this kind of stuff. I think it's interesting, especially if you're not Italian American on this webinar. If you're not, I really want to communicate with you. Tell me something about your culture that I should experience, because I think that that's something that we all can really enjoy. And if you want to know Italian stuff, I'm your girl, seriously, especially for this area. I am more than happy to share that with you. I think it's highly important. So with that, I am going to stop the screen share and I will open it up to some questions if there are any.
Thank you, Stephanie. And when people are putting in questions, I have one for you.
Okay.
I know we talked a little bit beforehand, and I know you did a walking guide in Lackawanna County. Could you kind of talk a little bit about how you found that information for that? Because I know for a lot of different cultures, that information isn't always the easiest to find. So how did you go about doing the research to put that guide together?
So that's actually an excellent question. So my background is in Italian American history. So I've been studying this since at least 2003. That's when I graduated college. So I feel really old right now. But I've been working on what I call reconstructing the Italian American history of our area. So my first book really was a reconstruction of history. A lot of times the ethnic communities don't keep detailed records of what they have done. So you're responsible for reconstructing that history, and it can be a roller coaster. I mean, that's the only way to describe it. When I finally came to a point with book presentations not happening due to COVID, things not going on, I knew I had to pivot as well as an author and try to really keep doing what I could to get the word out about this area's Italian culture. And I thought, we're able to go outside. Why don't I do a walking tour of some of the Italian sites that are around that people can go to and actually witness, because you don't have to necessarily go in. You could just be outside and then read the map. So I realized downtown Scranton, there's so much within walking distance of each other that it would make a really cool walking map. So that's out there. I'm more than happy to share that with people if they're interested. It gives you a really good idea of some of the Italian American culture in the city of Scranton. A lot of people don't realize that there were so many Italians in Scranton at one point that it actually was the seat of an Italian consulate. And that's one of the places that's on the walking tour as well.
That's awesome. And then one more for you from me. Since you mentioned food is such a big part of the Italian culture, what is one dish that you would recommend from the Italian culture for people to try this week?
So I wish that I was giving this at Easter time, because I would say absolutely go try pizza chiagna, which is the Italian Easter pizza. If you see that around someplace, you need to try it, because every family does theirs differently. There's an actual pizza chiagna group that is on Facebook that has over 1,000 people in it because everybody's sharing all their stuff. It's crazy. One of the co-hosts, Pat O'Boyle of the Italian American Podcast, actually founded that group just so people could share things, and it's got over 1,000 members just talking about this one dish. In my family, there's several different recipes for it. I think my mother's is the best, but everybody is going to say that. That's one thing. If you talk to an Italian, their mother makes it the best, and do not argue with that, because it's the truth. And it's just a fantastic dish. But locally, you have to definitely try the pizza. Check out the NEPA pizza review, because I think that Jim has done an amazing job with just getting all of that out there for people. I think that Luzerne County's pan-fried pizza, if I had to pick what my last meal on earth would be, it would be a slice of pan-fried pizza, because I love it so much. And I really like Cusumano's restaurant in Old Forge. He does an excellent job of preserving traditional Italian recipes. So check any of that out. But any Italian restaurant, if you go to it, one little word of advice, always ask what the specialty of the house is, because it's most likely a family recipe or something that they have perfected so much that you're not going to be able to taste it anywhere else. And every Italian restaurant in this area has an amazing specialty.
We do have one question that we
Okay.
got. How can your platform and movement band together with other cultures that also experience stereotypes and other races that also experience racism and new immigration groups experiencing hatred? And then for instance, they gave was retailers that may sell products offensive to a particular group.
I think that's an excellent question. I know that we were chatting beforehand. The Italian American community is in a really bizarre crossroads right now. We're considered white ethnics, but like I said in the presentation, there's people who consider Italians their own separate race. We're also our own ethnicity, our own nationality. Italy itself does not consider it any nationalities or any races. You're Italian and that's it. So if you are of a darker complexion, you're considered Italian no matter what, which I think is a really interesting thing. I think that all of the ethnic communities right now, because we're at such a crossroads, it's time to start coming up with that dialogue. Because I think that when I'm going out and speaking to people about Italian American culture, they don't realize what's happening for us. I'll say it, I hate saying the word, but I'll say it for this because I don't necessarily think that a lot of people on the call have heard it. The word Dago in our community is the equivalent of the N-word to an African American. People use it though regularly with us, and it's highly offensive. There's legislation out there to try to get hate crimes defined for the Italian American community. We're the only white ethnic community that it's still okay to have that mafia stereotype. It's still okay for some of these things. So we're trying to have these conversations. We also want to learn from other ethnic groups. And one that I've been very interested in is the Native American culture, trying to learn how they see some things, just for some other things I don't want to get into with the Italian culture going on that are of recent news. I think that when you start having these conversations amongst the cultures, you could then say, all right, this is unacceptable in my culture. What's unacceptable in your culture? Because I'm not going to do what you find unacceptable, but please don't do what I find unacceptable. And I think starting from that, at least for us from the Italian point of view, please don't call us Dagos, and think about it when you're hearing about the mafia stereotype. That is something that we across the board, a lot of us find extremely offensive. You know, start having those antenna up and start paying attention and think, can this offend somebody? Can this hurt somebody? And there's a difference between doing it out of malice and doing it out of ignorance. And if you don't know, you don't know. But once you're educated, please stop.
Very well said.
Thank you.
I'm just going to give a couple more minutes or a couple more seconds if anybody has any last minute questions that they'd like to put in for Stephanie. All right. Well, awesome. Well, Stephanie, thank you again for speaking with us today, and thank you for closing out this this webinar series. Like we said, this is going to be, it's recorded on our Facebook, and we'll have it up on YouTube. And thank you all for attending with us today and spending your lunch hour. I'd be remiss without thanking PNC Bank again for your sponsorship, for allowing us to do this whole 8-part webinar series. Again, you could, if you missed any of those sections of the series, you could go back on our YouTube page. It has a playlist where you can find them very easily. And if you are interested in more topics like this, we have the Greater Wyoming Valley Chamber Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. If you want to sign up for the council that helps plan events like this, there's the council page on our Get Involved tab. Or if you're just interested in staying up to date on the news of what we're doing, there is the Get Involved tab that lets you fill out for more information on this and all of our other councils. Thank you again, everybody who came, and hope to chat with everybody soon and stay connected. Thanks again.
Thank you. Grazie.